Good morning, everyone. This is Debbie Riley, CEO for the Center for Adoption Support and Education, and I welcome you on a Friday morning. I'm really impressed how many of you are signed up for the AM presentation. This is a webinar, Enhancing Your Clinical Practice with Adoptive and Guardianship Families, and I will be giving an overview of a wonderful opportunity that I will be sharing with you regarding the National Adoption Competency Mental Health Training Initiative. And today we will be focusing on the training for mental health professionals. NTI, National Adoption Competency Mental Health Training for Mental Health Professionals. This is an incredible opportunity, which is a service of the Children's Bureau, Administration for Children and Families, Department of Health and Human Services, and this is a cooperative agreement that was awarded to the Center for Adoption Support and Education in 2014. And I will be sharing a little bit later who our partners are, as well as our national advisors who helped us to create this product. So I want to talk a little bit about our goals today. One is to increase the understanding of mental health challenges of the foster and adoptive community based on research, to gain understanding of the core competencies of the foundational adoption competent mental health practice. And we're hoping to build awareness of NTI and provide you with some enrollment information in hopes that you will become part of our pilot project. So a little bit about the Center for Adoption Support and Education. CASE is moving into its 20th year. I'm one of the co-founders, and really proud to share that we are the national leader in mental health services. And locally in our area, just to give you some sort of framework, we have been treating foster and adopted children and have treated over 6,500 and have developed an array of adoption competent mental health services. So some of what I'll share with you today, just my philosophical sort of presentation around all this, has a lot to do with the clinical work that I've been involved in. I am myself a marriage and family therapist of 35 years. So we're really curious about who you are. We've had over 150 individuals registered for this morning and a similar amount this afternoon. So we're going to do a little bit of a poll, fun thing first to get us started, to get you engaged. And first, we'd like you to take the poll and answer the question, how did you hear about this webinar? So I think we did a pretty good job in using, a virtual platform and email invitation. It looks like 63% of you have received an email invite. I'm kind of curious, there's another 30% that had other. So if you want to, type in how else you heard about this, we're really curious to find that out. So thank you if you want to share that. It looks like some of you got this link from supervisors at your work, and maybe your local child welfare agencies have also reached out to you, and I'll talk a little bit about that partnership as well. So thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to our next question. What percentage of your current cases, we'd like to know, are comprised of children and families who might have experienced foster care, adoption, or guardianship? So it's interesting. It looks like, about half of you have had some experience with this population. And then what I'm very excited about is there's sort of a span where there's some of you that have had some, I would say, interfacing, but not in a maybe intensive way, which is wonderful to have you on board, and hope that we might entice you more once we talk about this work, that you might want to engage more, because really what we're about is building the capacity across the country to have mental health providers who really have the knowledge base to treat the children and families that we also care about. So thank you for sharing that. Next question is, how would you rate your current competency level in serving children and families who have experienced foster care, adoption, or guardianship? And we'd love for you to be honest. So again, I think, it's about an even split. I mean, some perceive yourselves as being very competent, and I would suspect some of you have really focused upon this population and have had maybe some other training or have chosen to focus. And then others, and you're not unlike me when I first started doing this work over, 27, 28, 30 years ago, is that I had a really sound clinical underpinnings of child and adolescent and family therapy, but really didn't know what I know now. And so I think it's really wonderful that, again, many of you are on here with an interest to expand your knowledge with this population. Okay, the next question. We finished with the question. Perfect. Excellent. So now I'm going to talk more about what is the case. Why now as a field are we really focusing upon this area of adoption competency? And I just want to talk a little bit about the fact that we have a lot of variability in regards to adoption today. For those of you that have a lot of experience in the field, you know that the face of adoption has dramatically changed and is changing really daily when we think about it. But we know that we have children joining their families at different ages. We have a lot of children that are moving from our foster care system into permanency who are in their adolescence. We have children who may be placed at birth and may be moving into families along the developmental continuum, and maybe from domestic adoption and or international. We have parents who are singles or couples, heterosexual or same-sex. We also are supporting a lot of families who have chosen to adopt transracially. Also, a large number of families now that are what we term kinship relative caregivers. And we know that in families we will have children that were joined into the family system through adoption, and some will be through birth. And also I think the ever-nature change of adoption really kind of falls along this issue with the openness in adoption more so now than ever before, and that many of the children, particularly those children that you may be working with clinically, coming from the foster care system, obviously being later placed, have had relationships with their birth families throughout their interfacing in foster care, and you're likely to be able to support those families, both birth, adoptive families, during this journey. I think that you would probably agree with me that for most children, adoption is a protective factor. I mean, what we want is we want to move children who are coming from very compromised beginnings, again, whether it's through domestic or international adoption, who lives have been wrought with deprivation and trauma and abuse and neglect, moving them into permanency where there's safety and nurturing. And that's really, I think, the goal of our work, is to ensure that permanency and safety and nurturance over time. But we know that given the realities of the types of adoptions that I've just talked a little bit about, the majority of children that are coming into families today, and remember I said the nature of adoption is evolving, that we have children that are moving into families with very profound histories of trauma and early adversity. And again, I think that that covers both the domestic and international realm. And so what are some of the impacting issues that will then lead those families and those children to potentially end up in your clinical practices? And we know that there are certainly profound prenatal issues. I think we often underplay the genetic factors in adoption. I think we need to focus more upon those. As I've been alluding to, the histories of complex trauma, the implications of moving life situations for these children, particularly those that have had orphanage or foster care placements. We know that children have many homes that they're moving to, many different caregivers, and many transitions. For some of the children, there might have been reunification and they went back into their birth family, and then things did not change and they had to be removed and come back into care. As a result of these separations, we are also looking at children that are managing very, I sometimes say, mangled and broken familial relationships that have long-lasting impact and certainly will compromise the attachment as they're moving into their permanent situation. The inconsistent and inadequate, and I hope you'll take this within perspective, of access to mental health services. Many of our families report that the services are either not available and or are not competent to meet the needs of their children and their families. And then something that we really, as a mental health, I think, population of providers really need to look at the over-prescriptions of psychotropic medications for this population of children, particularly children in care. I think sometimes when there are crises and we're overburdening resource families and we have children who, again, have pretty significant mental health issues that have not been addressed adequately, we tend to quickly want to medicate. And there's been a lot of forums and studies about this, and I think that we really have to make a shift there. And our hope by creating this web-based training and your engagement in the training might help us to find other ways to begin to address the issues on the front end before we move to quickly psychotropic interventions. Some of the other issues that will be impacting the children or that you're going to be seeing or have seen certainly is the resolution of, or not resolution of, loss and grief issues, which is at the hub of this work. It's an area of work that I think is not given enough focus, and what we're seeing here clinically and what I see across the country is that we have to afford the children the opportunity to mourn and grieve their losses and understand how that evolves developmentally. How do we support families and children as they're transitioning into permanency, and what does that adjustment look like? And how do we begin to address those attachment challenges that present themselves? To support guardianship and or adoptive families in regards to helping them understand what entitlement and claiming is about, and really helping them to embrace their children now that they are their children. Spending some time and looking at the cultural and racial and ethnic integration. This is a huge area, and one that for many of us, including myself at the time, did not get a lot of training in this in our graduate studies. And we have a high percentage of children that are placed transculturally and transracially, and we, as I think, providers have to be comfortable in talking about these issues and understanding the impact that they have on the children's racial socialization and development. What in general is the community's acceptance of adoption? There's still a lot of bias and misrepresentation about adoption that impacts our children. And again, what has been the preparation of the child prior to coming into adoption? And as we all do in our clinical assessments, is really trying to ascertain what are the individual coping skills that the children have, and maybe looking at resiliency. I like to caution when I talk about resiliency, because I think sometimes we overrate this and we say that these children are really resilient when in fact they're not. And I think sometimes we want to see that because it helps us manage, I think, the challenges of where they're coming from in a different light. But I think we have to be receptive to know that a lot of the kids that we've seen and a lot of kids that you will see are really struggling and aren't as resilient as we think that they are. We know that in research that adopted children are at elevated risk, really because of what I've just shared, for developmental and mental health and emotional and behavioral issues. We know the impact of adverse experiences will pose a lot of challenges for children throughout the life cycle. So, what you might be seeing if you referred children that might be early moving into placement, let's say 5 to 7, is going to look a lot different when they move into adolescence. We know that in any time in an adoptee's life that they're likely to enter therapy, it is during adolescence. The referral rate for adolescents is much higher than with the younger population. And what we also know, which substantiates why the Children's Bureau has invested in this very important project, is that adoptive families will utilize clinical services triple the rate reported by families formed by birth. So it's not surprising when we did our survey a few minutes ago that 50% of you felt, that you were pretty competent in this area and that you were working with this population because they're highly represented in the clinical realm. But I also think it speaks to why we have to have some more training to improve our proficiency in supporting this population. Also in the research, we know that 40% of youth that are moving from foster care are diagnosed with attentional issues, with a high incidence of prenatal drug and alcohol exposure, and certainly with the opioid epidemic at our doorsteps, I think these figures are going to dramatically rise. We also see higher rates of substance abuse problems among adopted youth. Again, if we embrace the whole predisposition genetically and environmentally, it's not surprising that we are going to be supporting children who may themselves begin to struggle with dependency issues. And we have higher rates of learning challenges and special educational needs for this population of children. Again, you can sort of align all of the dots that if you've got, the neurobiological implications of trauma, prenatal drug exposure, just the environmental factors, it's no wonder that we're seeing children that are going to have some pretty significant challenges academically. Up to 80% of children in foster care have had reported and significant mental health issues. And when we're looking at the comparison, you can see the number to the general population really is around 22%. So again, substantiates the fact that this is a population that is highly overrepresented in the mental health domain. And we also are seeing that this population of children are more likely to be, not surprisingly, diagnosed with externalizing problems rather than internalizing. But I have to say that I would really caution you to sometimes look a little bit deeper and don't let those that don't appear on the surface to be, struggling, that we might give the message to the families, well, they'll be okay. Because I think sometimes you can't minimize the impact of that early child's, I think, history of the trauma, the abuse and neglect, and for some, it is very much internalized and still needs to be addressed clinically. So adoption scholars have identified, some pretty critical family developmental tasks that will impact adoptive families as they work through the core issues of adoption. And I think it's important that we as mental health professionals really understand what those stages are and understand then how you will begin to treat some of the issues that we're talking about through this, what I'm calling adoption lens. We also probably may not see some of the behavioral manifestations that you are seeing in your practices until children are of school age. And again, as I said, it intensifies during adolescence. So I think the reality is that too often, we are moving profoundly impacted children into fairly healthy family systems. But when we don't give those family systems the right kind of pre-education and ongoing education and really adoption-competent clinical interventions, then what we see is those families, and don't mind my non-clinical professional statement, but they begin to look as crazy as the kids that we're treating. and they become overwhelmed and they become discouraged, and their self-esteem from the parental lens plummeted. And I think that it's really important that we never blame them for what they're not responsible for, and that we better help to understand what they don't know and what they need to know, and what are the right supports for themselves and their children. So the American Academy of Pediatrics did an interesting initiative, and they identified mental health and behavioral health as the, not one, but as the greatest unmet health need for children and teens in foster care. And you know, I think that we really have to pause on this slide and look at what this is saying. The greatest unmet health need for children and teens in foster care. So it's not surprising. Maybe it's surprising to you all, but this is not surprising. And what the parents are telling us loudly and clearly is that we need competent mental health professionals who really do understand the issues in adoption. And as I said before, don't blame us for things that we had no control over. We are not bad parents. So I'm just going to share a little bit from some of my personal cases that I've worked with, just some snippets of the, I think, powerful aspects of what happens when we don't have this level of competency. So Julia said, every time I brought up my adoption with my therapist, they said, I'm sure you and your family feel really lucky to have one another. And what she was sharing was it was really hard for me to speak about my anger and my confusion and sometimes my overwhelming sense of sadness about being adopted. And I think we have to create this space that along that developmental continuum, as children begin to process the journey of how they came into care or why they were placed on, you know, the steps of a hospital in China, or why they ended up in an orphanage, they're going to have a, you know, a varied feelings in regards to their personal adoption experience. And for many of the children that you're working with, there is a lot of confusion and a lot of feeling overwhelmed because many of our children don't have the information that they need to even begin to manage the story. And as Anna said, who, Annalicia, a mother, she was 51, she was parenting transracially. She said, every time I left my son's therapist's office, I felt like a failure. He's angry at me for being white, and when I try to bring it up with the therapist says, you know what, we really need to focus on the risky behaviors. Well, again, if we have this level of competency, those risky behaviors really are speaking out about what it might feel like to be in an environment maybe where I'm the only person of color, or maybe day in and day out I'm faced with huge amounts of racism, or maybe I don't know where I fit in among my peers, or maybe I'm the only person of color sitting at my family's Thanksgiving table every year. But these are the kinds of issues that we need to be able to address. And yes, there's going to be risky behaviors. But if we just deal with the surface, we're never going to get under the masks that you see to really address those issues. This was Roberto, who was placed in an American family after spending many years in an orphanage and had made a very serious suicide attempt. And at the hospital, the intake social worker said to him, you know, you should really be happy that you were adopted, that your parents had gotten you out of a horrible orphanage. Well, the reason why he had made a very serious suicide attempt is the transition into permanency was very difficult for him. He had missed all of those individuals that he had grown up with in the orphanage and was really struggling with adjustment into this new life here in America. And again, you know, when we're looking at allied health professionals, you know, this was a social worker in a psychiatric hospital in an ER situation that probably had no training around this issue, that needs to have some training. And this was not helpful as he was sharing to him at the time of his angst. And I think what most families will tell us is that they tried a lot of therapists who didn't specialize in adoption, and what often happened is the kids would train the therapist. And I think, that's how we got started here. We opened our doors and knew that there was a need, and a lot of what I'm sharing with you sort of came out of what we learned from the families in practice. It wasn't book knowledge. So how do we meet this ethical obligation, really, to provide the kinds of services that guardianship and adoptive families so desperately need? And I think when I consider what is best practice, I think that we have to understand the nature, the complexity, and the severity of the issues. And I think that we're hoping that we will have therapists who possess, you need to have a very diverse repertoire of clinical knowledge and skills. I mean, I think that you really have to, when we say sort of our, what's in our bag, it has to be a much larger bag. And I think that I'm hoping that your clinical skills will be embedded in attachment therapy, certainly from a family systems theory. These children need to be treated within their families and not seen in isolation individually. That's like imperative. We need to look at the ecological perspective and theoretical framework of where in the environments are the children living and what were those environments in which they came from. Certainly to have a strong foundation in child development. And really important is cultural competence. That you view, as I said, the family system through an adoption lens, and that you will make connections between adoption and the issues presented by the family, and you are willing to be knowledgeable and begin to, again, work through this developmental framework, understanding that adoption is really a lifelong journey, as was on the earlier slide. So there are a lot of emerging needs, and I think that there are now practice standards that integrate evidence-based mental health practices with adoption-sensitive practice knowledge and skills. And I will talk to you about how we've embedded that within the curriculum that I will be sharing with you a little bit later. That there are more postmasters adoption competency training programs that are beginning to teach some of the national practice standards that we have developed here. And we'll provide some ongoing practice support as well for clinicians. I think that for those of us who are willing to do this work, it's going to be really important that we are aligning ourselves with other clinicians to continue some case consultation, and we'll be talking about some coaching that we will align with this product as well. And our ultimate goal is that we will really strive to build a workforce of adoption specialists who are competent, who will receive training through this initiative, and then as we shared, there are other training programs where you may want to go on further to expand your knowledge base. So what are we doing to respond to the need? Well, what we're doing is, as I shared before, we were really honored to be awarded this cooperative agreement from the Children's Bureau to create 2 web-based training programs to enhance the capacity of professionals in the field, and ultimately our goal is to improve outcomes for children and families. So when I reference to this project, NTI has created 2 products. One is a web-based training program for child welfare professionals, and that's where many of you were invited to this forum because of your partnering organizations that we've been piloting. And the child welfare curriculum has already been launched, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But today, we're really wanting to focus on the mental health web-based product that we will be hopefully providing to those of you that are interested in continuing with us. So our objectives were to create a state-of-the-art, engaging, competent curriculum, and I have to say it's really fabulous. I'm not just saying that because we're creating it, but it's really good. And I'm going to show you an example of it a little bit later. We then are delivering it, so we have 8 pilot sites throughout the country right now that are engaged in our implementation activities of reaching users to experience the web-based products. We have a very rigorous evaluation that if you choose to be part of the pilot, you will be part of. And then our goal is to launch the products in 2019 so they're accessible to all across the country. Our overarching strategy here is that we will provide you with knowledge, core values, and skills that you can integrate into your clinical practices. So what difference does adoption competency make? To say it was like night and day is an understatement. We had a therapist who was God-sent. She really understood all the nuances and complexities of adoption and growing up in a family the children weren't born into, and that was a quote from a parent. She really, really got it. For starters, she included me in the therapy, so we were in there together, and she helped to coach and facilitate me doing the healing with my kids. She recognized that my husband and I live with the children 24/7, and they're not just going to heal in the 50-minute session once a week. And I think that this is really important. Deb Shug is a colleague of mine and has adopted children with profound special needs and does a lot of speaking across the country. And I think she hits on a lot of important points. One, as I said earlier, this work has to be done within a family systems perspective. So for those of you that might not be comfortable with that, then maybe this isn't the right work for you. I think she also understands that it's more than just 50 minutes. These are families that are going to need much more intensive support and accessibility to you, as well as for you to be able to work with other professionals that they're interfacing with because of the nature of the special needs of the children that they're parenting. So as I shared a minute ago, we are creating two products. One is Child Welfare Curriculum, which is 20 hours, and it also incorporates several lessons for supervisors. And now we're in the process of completing the mental health curriculum, which will be around 25 hours, plus a coaching model for you to be able to engage in. The NTI is free web-based training, and for the pilot, there will be free CEUs provided. So we're working really diligently to ensure that we're aligning these two products together. One of the things that we see lacking in the field is where the child welfare professionals who are responsible for ensuring, obviously, child well-being and are making lots of referrals to mental health providers in their communities to begin to address a lot of the issues that we talked about today. What we're finding is there's not a shared spoken language. And what we also feel is that there really isn't accountability. And again, please don't take this negatively. But I think that we have to start meeting the children's mental health needs. And I think too often kids are being referred out, and there isn't oversight. We're not looking at what our goals are of the treatment. We're not looking at treatment outcomes in a way that we need to. So we're really hoping that we'll build a bridge between you and the referring organizations, and that you can collaborate in a much more intensified way. The content of NTI is formed by research on many levels. So in creating a web-based product, we've spent a lot of time at looking at what is the best practice in adult learning theory. You know, what's going to keep you engaged, like right now? I'm not sure what a lot of you are doing as you're listening to me. I hope you're focused, and we hope we're making this engaged. But when I can show you an example of the module itself, we've really integrated a lot of interaction, a lot of videos, a lot of sort of virtual discussions that you will be a part of with yourselves and the content throughout the content. We've included evidence-based interventions that are actually been studied in being effective with this population, and you can hear sort of my underscoring that. I think that there are a lot of evidence-based protocols out there right now, but we have to make sure that they're protocols that are meeting the needs of specific populations and they've been tested for those populations. We're also going to infuse clinical best practices, tools, and strategies that you can continue to use. And the competencies that we built both of the curriculums around were vetted by a very intensive process where we pulled national advisors in the field of child welfare, adoption, cultural competence, to vet those competencies in helping us design this curriculum, as well as people with lived experience, children who grew up in foster care, children who were post-institutionalized, guardianship and adoptive families as well. As you can see, the national advisors are on your screen. I'm not going to go through all of them, but you can look, I'll pause if you just want to briefly look at it, but it really is a breadth of incredible individuals who have dedicated their careers to this work, and we were truly honored that they wanted to give of their time voluntarily to this product, and I think that they feel as strongly as we do that this is sorely missing in the field, and they wanted to be able to contribute to it. The other exciting component of all of this is that we have some exceptional partners. So the University of Maryland School of Social Work through the Institute for Innovation and Implementation is working side by side with us in creating the web-based products that you will be experiencing. They're involved in the entire evaluation for the project as well. Obviously, the Children's Bureau, who is our funder, the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption, PolicyWorks, who also is part of our evaluation team, NICWA, so that we're infusing, one of our goals is to infuse this curriculum into all tribes and territories across the United States, as well as child welfare organizations. So we're really glad to have that cultural competence as part of our team. And then eventually we will use the RUD Adoption Research Program to, as well as with the Dave Thomas Foundation, to begin to move this information out into the field. So just to share a little bit about the implementation process, we have 3 implementation specialists that I will show soon, the pilot sites, that are really working closely with your child welfare organizations in your communities, and I really do have to give a shout out to them. If you could go to the next slide. We are piloting in California, in the Cherokee Nation, in Illinois, Maine, Minnesota, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Washington State. And so many of you have gotten invitations from your child welfare organizations because you're either a provider through them or you've been identified by them as someone that could potentially be a part of this important initiative. And I really want to acknowledge the state systems who have chosen to pilot. There was no fiscal incentives for them to do this. They have opened their hearts, I think, and themselves to knowing that this is sorely needed within their systems and within the mental health community, and have really embraced our implementation specialists who are assigned to their states and helping them move this internally. So when we talk about the implementation process, one of the slides didn't show all of the pieces to it, but their pilot is running now. Child welfare pilot will end in January, and then we will start the mental health in March, which will run through, I think, September. And then we will look at all the evaluation data and have time to revise the curriculum and getting ready for a national launch. So as I shared, the child welfare pilot is alive and well. We have exceeded the numbers who we thought would participate, thanks again to the state's commitments. We have 5,000 child welfare professionals who are enrolled in the web-based training, and over 2,400 have completed. Over 100,000 hours of training thus far have been provided. I mean, it's amazing. And we actually, what you're seeing on the screen, we sent all of the completers a really cool candy bar that says success is sweet. Thanks for completing NTI. So you never know, you might get a candy bar if you finish this training. So some of the feedback so far, I thought I would share this. This is from child welfare staff, is I've examined my own implicit bias and encouraged my coworkers to do the same. I also started viewing all children and child-parent relationships through a trauma-aware lens. I've been able to use some of the questions from the handouts when exploring family history with my adoptive families. I've been able to use specific questions to elicit more in-depth answers. So we begin to see a change now in really from the front end around assessment and how workers are feeling more comfortable in asking these questions. Another worker said, I've successfully helped each of the families understand the importance of contact. I think they're talking about, birth contact, and how we'll improve each of the children's mental health to know they can have safe and healthy sibling relationships. So again, more openness around openness in itself and understanding the implications on one's mental health when you're ripped away from siblings that you may or may not see in the future. So I want to talk a little bit about the target audience of who we would like to be involved in the mental health pilot with us. Are community-based and private clinicians that are currently providing or, as reflected early in our poll, may be interested in providing these services to children in foster care with a goal of or preparing for adoption and guardianship. So some of you might actually have contracts or be working with the child welfare agencies in the preparation end and the support in moving to permanency. Families who are preparing to have or assumed guardianship of a child from foster care, families who are preparing or have children in their home that were from foster care experience or private or domestic adoption and or inter-country adoption, and certainly the whole arena of the post-placement. So when I say post-placement, what I'm meaning and referring is the families years after finalization, years after they've left child welfare support, families that now have maybe adolescents who are struggling with a lot of identity issues or just their understanding of their adoption experience, that you all will be there for the families in a post-placement perspective. So I want to talk some about the core competencies. Again, what I shared was that our hope is that we will provide you with foundational knowledge. We know this is 25 hours. All of this isn't going to mean that you're, everybody's adoption competent after taking this, but we're hoping that we're giving you some foundational knowledge, values, and skills to enhance your practice. Our competencies are going to focus on healing from loss and grief, the healing from trauma. How do you support and rebuild attachment? How will you support positive identity formation, both transracially, transculturally, and just in general, what it means to be adopted and the impact that it has on my identity? How you will assess and provide treatment planning through an adoption lens now, the understanding of race and the impact of ethnicity, culture, and diversity on adoptive and guardianship families, and also what is the value and need for providing post-adopt services. So for you, again, to think about that you might see families at one particular time in the developmental framework, but then they're going to come back to you. Here at CASE, we have families coming and kids coming back now where the kids that we treated when they were younger are now in their 30s coming back working through issues that they need to readdress. So we'll be talking a lot about the case for adoption competency in the training of really helping you to better understand why we're doing this work. What are the complex mental health challenges of the population? In-depth overview of the impact of loss and grief, the impact of trauma on brain development and behavior. How do we begin to develop skills and for ourselves and for our families to teach attachment and bonding? We will provide a really in-depth overview of the whole cultural and race implications in placement, the whole journey of identity formation, again, spending a lot of time with you on how you will hopefully modify and I think enrich your assessment process to include questions that would be more in line with what our families are wanting you to ask, and then developing treatment plans that align with these adoption competent, I think, issues, the therapeutic parenting strategies, and ultimately, how are we going to promote stable families? I mean, what we want is we don't want to see disruptions, and we don't want to see disillusionments of placements. I mean, we want these placements to remain permanent. And ultimately, you know, we want the highest level of child well-being that we can achieve. So we've given some examples here in some of the areas, not all, but around these skills. So if we are looking at attachment, we're hoping that as a result of this training that you will be maybe more informed to assist children to explore and understand their past attachment experiences and how to build new, trusting, secure relationships. I mean, one thing we know, and families will tell you this, is that kids come into their home and there's a great honeymoon period where everything's great. And then for some reason, the children are doing everything they could possibly do to get the parent to reject them. So how do we begin to work on that in a therapeutic way? And to assist parents to understand the concept. We talked earlier about that, about what is entitlement and what is claiming. When we move down to looking at loss and grief, is really conducting sound clinical assessments that will examine the depth and the history of the losses that these children have had, and then begin to develop a treatment plan of how will you developmentally begin to help this child grieve and better understand these losses. So I've talked a little bit about that. The identity formation is, what are some therapeutic approaches that you could integrate where you're going to really help them explore the dimensional components of this identity quest for children that have had such profound beginnings and have had so many people in their lives. How do you help them better understand who they are and where they came from? And then what would be some therapeutic approaches to work on identity formation with adolescents, and also helping the parents understand why they have a desire to learn everything they can about where they came from and potential reconnection with birth family members. So what are the benefits? Why take this training? Number one, as I said, it's awesome. It's state-of-the-art. It's web-based, so maybe a lot of you may be very experienced with classroom-based, as I was, but I think that you'll find that you're going to get a lot from this web-based interactive platform that we've created. It gives you an opportunity to learn at your own pace with opportunities for reflection. So, you know, maybe you can't be somewhere 6 hours, but you have some time, you know, in the morning before you're seeing clients to, you know, put an hour or two to look at the curriculum. We've implemented engaging activities using real-life cases that we've worked with, case vignettes, videos of people that have had lived experience, as well as bringing you experts in the field to speak with you around these issues. There are a multitude of very rich downloadable resources, and as I said, at least for the pilot, you will get some free CEUs. So what we'd like to do now, now that I've pumped this up, is give you a demo of what you would experience if you chose to participate in this pilot. Give me a minute and we'll get this started. And I'll stop along the way to sort of show you a little bit about the navigation and different pieces of the training. We're working on the sound, so give us a second. And this will be just like it is at home. You know, you'll get your computer on and you'll go, wait a minute, I don't have the sound on right.
Lesson 1, course overview and the need for adoption competence. The objectives for this lesson are: acquire appropriate expectations for this course based on an accurate understanding of the focus, nature, and main goals of the training. Identify core knowledge, values, and skills that characterize an adoption-competent mental health professional.
So pause a minute. So what I want to share with you, you notice that I clicked on notes, so you may read along with the curriculum throughout the modules, and you know, if you want, you can also print the notes. Also, what I'll show you in navigation, if you go back to the menu will be each, you know, sort of component that when you click further into the curriculum, it'll, you know, if you want to come back and look at something again, you can. And then if you click on the resource tab at the top, will be all the handouts that we put in the particular links for your references later on. So I'm going to leave the notes up in case some of you are auditorily focused like I am. You might, or visually, you can have both.
This training is designed to enhance the capacity of mental health professionals to understand and address the complex mental health needs of children. This training will focus on children who have found permanency through adoption or guardianship, whether from foster care in the U.S., from other countries, or through private domestic adoption. Let's start with a brief introduction from Debbie Riley, CEO and co-founder of CASE, the lead agency for this training initiative.
Hello, I'm Debbie Riley, CEO of the Center for Adoption Support and Education CASE. I'd like to welcome you to a very important initiative, the National Adoption Competency Mental Health Training Initiative, NTI. This 5-year federal grant, funded through the Children's Bureau, Administration on Children and Families, Department of Health and Human Services, is intended to improve the well-being outcomes for children and youth moving to adoption and guardianship, as well as providing support and appropriate therapeutic intervention to ensure stable and secure post-permanency experiences for children and families from all adoption experiences. The research and practice supports that while there was a need for adoption competent services, there was a dearth of specialized trained mental health providers to meet this growing need. The feedback from families was really clear. They wanted adoption competent mental health services from practitioners that truly understood the nuances of what it means to grow up in foster care and orphanages, the impact of traumatic beginnings, the impact of separation from one's family and culture of origin, transracial and transcultural challenges, the importance of their adoption stories, how to manage the profound loss and grief, and the complexities of one's identity formation. They also wanted mental health professionals to give them the tools to parent children successfully, to understand that adoptive parenting is very different than biological parenting, and most importantly, not to be blamed for things that they were not responsible for. Through this innovative training, child welfare professionals and mental health practitioners in all states, tribes, and territories will now have access to standardized, web-based, evidence-informed training. By providing you with a specialized lens in adoption competency, we believe you will be more effective in addressing the mental health needs of children and families experiencing adoption or guardianship, enhancing your skills in clinical assessments, treatment planning, and evidence-informed intervention. The NTI training embraces the work of so many experts in the field who have dedicated their careers to better understanding how we could improve the outcomes of children whose lives have been impacted by the experiences of out-of-home care and adoption. If you're a seasoned therapist, this training will heighten and broaden your knowledge and skills, adding a new layer of expertise to your practice. And for those of you who are newer to clinical practice, I'm really confident that this training will provide you with an innovative toolkit of skills and strategies to build your practice with this population. For the past 20 years, CASE has had the honor of building an array of adoption-competent mental health services, responding to an unmet need voiced by foster and adoptive families across our country. As a clinician myself, I've seen the overwhelming positive outcomes when this knowledge is infused into clinical practice. My hope is that all of us together can build the capacity to meet the growing needs of the families we serve and ultimately improve the outcomes for the children we all so desperately care about. Thank you so very much. The National Adoption Competency Mental Health Training for Mental Health Professionals consists of 10 modules, each with 5 approximately half-hour lessons for a total of 25 hours of training. There's an additional coaching component, which will involve participation in 4 coaching sessions provided by expert adoption competent clinicians. This training addresses the needs of children who achieve permanence through adoption or guardianship, including children adopted from foster care, private domestic adoption, and international adoption. The content focuses on knowledge, values, and skills that you can integrate into your practice, broadening your understanding and assessment of children's complex mental health needs to choose interventions that are most likely to be effective and to address key issues within the family. The competencies you gain will enhance your ability to engage and support children who are being prepared for or in adoptive and guardianship families, and help adoptive parents and guardians provide the nurturing and structured family environment so vital to children's healthy development. Each module includes a pre-test and a post-test, and after you successfully complete all 10 modules, there's a final test. Trainees who score 75% on the final post-test will receive a certificate of completion and 25 Category 2 CEUs provided through the University of Maryland School of Social Work. There is also an NTI web-based training designed for child welfare professionals, which is focused on adoption and mental health competent casework practices for children and families. Both curricula have an emphasis on practices that promote positive identity, attachment capacity, understanding of the impact of trauma, and healing from loss and trauma, with the training for mental health clinicians focused on clinical practice. This training complements and is consistent in its values and beliefs with existing child welfare permanency planning practice and current knowledge regarding mental health and adoption. You will find the training respects diversity and is consistent with ethical and best practice standards.
This course by itself does not make a professional adoption competent, but rather it is a framework of specialized knowledge and practice strategies that builds upon the foundation provided by your professional training. This course will give you an awareness of the complexities of adoption and guardianship and the factors that interact to shape a child's adjustment and mental health needs. Over time, you can build on this framework through continuing education in adoption competency, supervision, and practice experience. When you think about what it means to be adoption competent, what are the knowledge, values, and skills a person should have in working with adoption and guardianship families?
So here's an example of an interactive exercise that you would be involved in. So we're just going to
We will reflect upon this later at the end of this lesson.
So knowledge of loss.
Adoption is a more complex way to form a family, and adoptive families face issues that are different from families formed through birth. Let's explore these unique differences. Adoption is a powerful human experience with unique issues for adopted individuals and members of their birth and adoptive families. It touches on universal themes of creating life, abandonment and loss, personal identity, and a sense of belonging. Many experts have identified a range of issues that surface throughout the life cycle for members of the adoption kinship network as they address emotional aspects of adoption. We will explore these psychological themes later in this training, as well as the normative developmental challenges confronting adopted individuals and their families. In addition, other issues such as the impact of the child's past experiences, parents coping with infertility and other losses, or transracial and or transcultural adoption add additional layers of complexity. Many adopted children and parents can cope with the normative challenges without seeking professional help. However, those who struggle from the impact of adverse early life experiences may need specialized adoption-competent mental health services. And yet, many mental health professionals do not understand the significance of adoption or guardianship in the lives of their clients and its connections to other aspects of their struggles. Sadly, research tells us that many adoptive and guardianship families do not feel they are getting the help and understanding they need to maximize their success in parenting their children, either before or after adoption or guardianship. Please listen to this brief clip of Dr. David Brzezinski, a clinical psychologist and adoption scholar, explaining the rationale for this training.
Well, as someone who's been involved in training clinicians around adoption and foster care issues for a long time, it's probably 25 to 30 years now, one of the things that I've come to learn is that most clinicians don't know what they don't know. They get good training typically. They may well be excellent clinicians, but the complexities that adoptive families face are not taught in graduate school. Adoption is not a topic that typically is part of a clinical curriculum, even in social work. A little bit here and there, but the complexity is known. So one of the things that is important for them to realize is the sheer nature of what adoption is, the processes involved, the complexities that these families face in becoming parents, what the child has been through as they have been moved either voluntarily or not from the biological family into sometimes foster families and another foster family and then another foster family and finally end up into an adoptive home, or what it's like for a child who grows up for the first year or so in an orphanage where they experience congregate care but not really one-on-one parent-child care, and then enter their adoptive family. So there's so much in the dynamics of adoption that are critical. It's critical for clinicians to know about that they simply don't have training in. There's no question in my mind that clinicians, if they want to be adoption-competent clinicians, need to have specialized training. There's a body of knowledge that needs to be integrated together for them to be able to approach these families in not only clinically effective ways, but sensitive ways, understanding what these families have gone through, understand what the children have gone through. I think parents very often are aware when they're working with someone who's adoption competent. They sense the empathy of the clinician with regard to what they've gone through. The children sense an empathy for what they've gone through. There's been a lot of families that I've worked with over the years that have come to me after working with other clinicians who they've been very dissatisfied with. Sometimes they've been given information that they feel has been simply wrong, sometimes insulting. Sometimes clinicians have gone so far as to say, well, why don't you return the child to the agency? A comment that doesn't represent knowledge of the adoption process.
There is an article in your resources section by Dr. Brzezinski titled, A Need to Know, Enhancing Adoption Competence Among Mental Health Professionals. We will briefly review some of the primary reasons that Dr. Brzezinski advances for why specialized training is essential for counseling professionals to meet the needs of individuals and families touched by adoption. Throughout this curriculum, you will see an icon on the screen to notify you when there is a handout for you to view in the Resources tab. Click on the icon to view the handout.
So this is an example where we'll refer you to a resource that you can click on and then read or print later if you want to. That's throughout the entire curriculum. So now I'm going to go back, so you would do the same thing yourselves if you were doing this. And then we would click Next.
As we consider the clinical approaches, it is critical to explore the research that substantiates the need for adoption competence. Research indicates that adopted families are 3 to 5 times more likely to seek mental health or other counseling services for their children, and at least 7 to 10 times more likely to seek residential treatment than are birth families. Some of this difference may be due to a greater willingness to seek help, but it also is indicative of a higher level of challenges.
So I'm going to pause here, and I'm going to just take you back to the menu for a second because I want to show you the end. So there's lots in here, but at the end, I want to show you how we'll wrap up every lesson for you.
This course provides the foundational knowledge, values, and skills central to adoption competence, but it does not prepare you for every challenge. As with any training, you will need to continue to expand your expertise through continuing education and supervision. At the end of each lesson, you will have an opportunity to reflect on each lesson, specifically what you learned and what you will take and use in your practice. It may be a good idea to print and compile them to keep as a learning journal for reference when working with these types of families. Click on the bottom right corner of the notebook to open it. Reflecting on this lesson, what are your key takeaways about the need for adoption competence?
So you would type something.
How will you apply what you have learned from this lesson in your clinical work?
You would include families more in the treatment, right?
This is your journal, so use the space below to write anything else you want to remember.
I think this is the best training I've ever taken.
Click the Print Results button to print and save your answers.
So that just gives you an idea of, again, how every lesson will be ended, and we really hope that you'll, put some thought into it and be able to print this so that you can have this as a reference for you later. Okay. Yeah. So now we're going to go back into the presentation itself. We'll be able to talk about this a little while when we have some questions and answer time. So as I shared with you, the resource tab, so you saw that there are lots of resources and downloadable ones that you can print for yourselves. The tab that I showed you, the notes, allows you to read along with the presentation. And again, we have lots of national experts. That's Dr. Bruce Perry, if you don't recognize him, who talks a lot in our trauma module. And then, as was shared, you will have a certificate after the completion of the 25 hours, along with CEUs that will be provided through the University of Maryland School of Social Work. The transfer of learning is something that we take very seriously, so we will be having live coaching consultation calls with a sample population of those of you that pilot are involved in the pilot. We can't, because of the timing that we have right now, include everyone, but there will be sort of a random outreach of participants that will engage in 3 coaching sessions that we will design throughout the mental health curriculum delivery. So the accessibility and timing of all this is that the mental health will launch in March, and it will run through September. So we, for this pilot, have to put a beginning and end time because, again, we have to conduct our rigorous evaluation on all of this. It will be available to you 24/7, so if you're like me and you work all kinds of hours in the night, you'll just 1 o'clock in the morning, you might decide that you want to do a lesson. It's accessible on really any platform, from a laptop to a tablet or even your smartphone, although I don't encourage you to do this while you're driving. You can complete at your own pace, and each pilot site will establish sort of the enrollment and participation requirements. So target users will enroll in the training. You will complete, what we're asking is that you will decide whether you want to enroll. You will complete within the required time frame, so we're really looking for therapists that will make this commitment from March to September. We obviously will have you engaged in our evaluation and hope that you will provide us feedback about the training content. This is a research initiative, and your input is really valuable to us because, again, what we're going to do in 2019 is launch this to everyone. So, I think it's really exciting that some of you might choose to participate because you will then influence what this product will look like once it's ready for national launch, and that we really hope that you will also infuse what you're learning into your day-to-day work with this population. So why should you participate? Well, I do believe that now we have the support federally, locally, that this is an important national movement, and we're beginning to see the terminology of adoption competency in practice. We're seeing it in the field, we're seeing it in research, and we're seeing it politically. We're seeing this being put part into legislation where I think now the field is saying, yes, our children deserve a level of competence in order to meet their diverse mental health needs. I know that it's going to expand your clinical practice as a therapist myself. I can tell you that for sure. It will enhance the strategies that you now will have in working with this population. And I know that it will have some impact upon the families. It has to, because we're going to be giving you what the families are asking for. And I think that as you decide how you want to build and market your practices, if you decide that this is a specialization, as we have here at CASE, or a subspecialization, that it could expand referrals to your practice. I think some of our states are really thinking about how they will, in the future, contract with providers, and may want to have folks that have at least this beginning level of training if you're going to work with their families. So here's some other, comments. The NTI training was the best I've ever had in 16 years from the department, and this is the child welfare staff. Any chance I could have a link to the content to keep so I can review it forever? So on the screen, you'll see our wonderful staff. Dawn Wilson, who some of you will hear from in future times, is the director of the project. Karen Meyer is our marketing project manager. Lisa Maynard is our implementation specialist who supports the states of Maine and Minnesota and Washington State. Emily Smith-Goring is our implementation specialist, and she is overseeing the huge state of California, Oklahoma, and the Cherokee tribes. And then Mary Wachansky is in Illinois, South Carolina, and Tennessee. So I want you to remember their names if you're thinking about what state you're in, because you probably will get communication from them on an ongoing basis. So I want to open it up for questions and providing some answers if we can. And I'm going to have the staff here kind of help me navigate. So if you'd like to type in a question, we'll try to address that. So let's see if we have some questions here. We're also going to have a survey at the end that we would love for you to take, which would allow you to let us know if you would like to be a participant in the pilot. So please fill it out, and if you have to leave early, I think a link will be sent to you. So there's a question about our agencies in South Carolina, but we have remote staff who also work in 2 other states. Could they participate with our South Carolina staff? Absolutely. It's all remote. So again, the geographic boundaries are not an issue. It's wherever you are, you can take the course. Is this APA accredited? No. You can begin to enroll. If you give us your information now, our site implementation specialist will be in touch with you about when open enrollment will occur.
Debbie, there's a question about if there's a limit to the number of users that can enroll.
Okay. There's no limit to the number of users. Does this program include any ethical hours? We're kind of working on that. I mean, there are ethics throughout, so we'll have to get back to you about that. That's been a question that we've gotten some questions about. Again, when and how to enroll. If you complete the survey, we will be able to notify you when we will be opening up the training. Are any of the interventions that incorporate expressive art therapies? Art therapies are very important to our work, and yes, they are embedded throughout the training. You can participate as any licensed, you can participate as any mental health professional, whether you're a social worker, psychologist, MFT, pastoral counselor, anyone in the mental health profession can participate in this training. And yes, the CEUs are NASW approved. I'm a little confused. Didn't already enroll for the class or just the webinar? Right now, you're only enrolled for the webinar. Again, if you want to enroll for the class, please complete the survey when the link is sent to you. let me see here. Do you recommend managers versus clinicians or both? I would really recommend that all clinical managers take this training as well. I think that if you as an organization are really going to embed this practice organizationally, that you have to be a role model for this. And frankly, you're going to need the knowledge as well. Can I share this with students that I consult with at a PhD program who may not yet be licensed? Yes. Is necessary for people to have participated in the other pilot. So the other pilot is only for child welfare. This product is for mental health providers. So you only would participate in this one, and there's no prerequisite to be a part of this one. Yes, you do have to complete the entire program to get the CEU. So I want to say something about this as well. We've created this as a integrated product. We are not recommending or encouraging that this be done just taking one module. I mean, in order to complete the whole thing, I mean, we want you to complete the whole thing because the lessons are woven to be interdependent. Are there any educational requirements to participate? You need to have at least, I mean, I would say we're really looking for master level individuals or bachelor level that are providing direct services. There are some states where bachelor level are. But, you know, I need to say that this is very clinically focused. I mean, we're talking about diagnosis, we're talking about treatment, so we're wanting practitioners who are delivering mental health services to take this training. If I hire new staff after March launch, can they enroll as long as they complete? Absolutely. But they have to complete by September. How do we differentiate if we would like to register for the child welfare? I'm sorry, but the child welfare is closed. You can't register for that any longer. You can when at the national launch, but the pilot for it is closed now. Is there any other questions? The CEU should be just fine for your LPC. I mean, they certainly, you can check with your state, but they should be fine. So I'm just curious, besides questions, I'm curious, what are some of your thoughts about what we've shared so far? Can anybody type some, and I can read it? What do you think about what we're offering? And I'm just kind of curious about hearing some feedback from y'all. Don't be shy. Looks like multiple attendees are typing, so. Sounds informative, it's needed. I'm so excited to start the training. Very exciting, wonderful opportunity. It's going to be so helpful for providers, especially those working on post-adopt services. So glad to see the attachment portion especially being included, as well as a focus on family therapy. It's going to be so helpful for our providers. I've been working for families, either adopted children or children in foster care for 10 years. I've taken the permanency and adoption competency training, and this sounds like a wonderful practical application training. I'm finally hoping there is finally a training that gives useful how-to versus telling us how the issues with no guidance or help. I've had some complement training through Rutgers, wondering if they should do this training as well. Guess that will be up to them. So we put the link for the survey up for you all, and I really want to thank you. We've had over 150 registrants for this morning. So I'm excited, our team's excited that you're all interested. And I think the most important thing is that this training is going to provide with a tremendous amount of practical application in your